programs are: 1, reduce the length of time people experience homelessness, increase their housing success rate, and decrease returns to homelessness. So let's talk a little bit about how these 3 metrics look different in each of the housing program types. Transitional housing. Time homeless and transitional housing is a little unique. These folks aren't housed per se, but there's fewer expectations for them to move on. So in general, you want to encourage folks to stay in program for as long as their 24 months as they need, and be supported in moving out earlier if that's appropriate. Again, they can measure housing success rates by looking at the percent of folks exiting during a period who exited to a permanent housing situation. For rapid rehousing programs, length of time homeless, we're looking at the number of days between program entry and their move-in date, which is a special data field that we have for housing programs. This is looking at, sure, they're in a housing program, but when did they actually move into their unit, right? Because they're going to be entered probably the first time they meet with their case manager. They're entered as soon as all criteria indicates that they're eligible, and there's a reasonable expectation that there is either a unit available for them or there will be one soon. So they are likely to be in the program for some time before actually moving into their unit, getting their keys. This goal is, in a lot of communities have set this goal at 30 days. So 30 days from enrollment to move-in. Note here, if you find in your community there is a lot of time passing between when somebody is referred by coordinated entry and subsequently enrolled in program, it might be worth looking at the time from referral to move-in date instead of just program entry to move-in date. What this is going to help you identify in particular are programs that maybe don't do the enrollment right up front. They're waiting more to see if this person's going to be successful before actually entering them, which is something you'd want to flag, right? Everybody that a program is trying to serve should be entered into the program. Housing success rates, again, just like the others, we're going to look at people or households exiting program during a period of time who exited to permanent housing. Generally, this is going to be folks that were housed through rapid rehousing, received a subsidy, and are no longer receiving a subsidy but managed to stay in their unit. Sometimes you'll see folks who their subsidy ran out and they found a roommate, moved in with family permanently. Those things count too. That is still going to be a permanent destination. Generally, rapid rehousing programs are aiming for 80% exits to permanent housing. Permanent supportive housing, same thing as rapid rehousing for length of time homeless. We're looking at time between program entry and their housing move-in date. Or, if you see a gap here, referral to housing move-in date. This is often a more useful measure for scattered site PSH. Some project-based PSH programs, that means there is a specific building set aside where here is where our PSH is. Permanent supportive housing happens here. A lot of those programs are set up to move folks in the day their enrollment paperwork is finalized. Remove barriers. If they're willing to go in, let them go in right away. So enrollment to move-in date is less meaningful there. Although referral to move-in date is likely still going to be important there. So housing success rates. This is the one that's different. They are unique for PSH programs because it's permanent supportive housing, right? It's right there in the name. So housing success can be an exit to permanent housing, like they've moved on, especially if it's somebody who isn't utilizing services so much anymore. Maybe they've been transferred over to a voucher, or they didn't move on. You just kept them in the program. If there's a housing move-in date, you have to have housed them for it to count as a housing success. So any given person in a program over the course of a year, the reporting period, they're going to count as a success if they either exited to permanent housing or are housed through the program and maintained that housing. Both of those are going to count as success for PSH programs. And the goal here is generally going to be about 95%. Returns to homelessness, that's going to be the same for everybody. If you successfully house somebody and exit them from your program, do they end up coming back to your program within the next 2 years? The system performance measures that we all submit to HUD breaks it up into returns within 6 months, returns within 1 year, returns within 2 years. A lot of communities reach for that returns within 2 years metric to determine success. I would encourage you to, if not instead, also look at 6-month returns or 12-month returns, because that's going to give you more current information about folks' experience, right? Because when we're evaluating returns for a period, say I'm looking at returns for last year, what I'm actually looking at are of the folks I housed 2 years prior, how many of them came back? And we have so much turnover, so much staffing turnover, such frequent changes in our models that might not be relevant anymore. So knowing what happened 2 years ago might be less helpful than knowing of all the folks that I housed before last June, how many of them are back already? Just something to keep in mind as you're designing your program evaluations.